to stay quiet on such actions to avoid upsetting Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's bring in Barry McCaffrey, retired four-star general, NBC News military analyst, and former National Security Council member. Also, we have Betsy Woodruff, MSNBC contributor and politics reporter of the Daily Beast. Ned Price, MSNBC national security analyst and a former National Security Council spokesperson under President Obama. So, Ned, back and forth. When does the back and forth end and how?
Well, that's the question, Richard. We have only to date seen escalation from both sides. It's been a tit for tat. And I think what we've learned from Moscow over the years is that Newton's third law applies to diplomacy with the Russians. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And that's precisely what we've seen. I think what we need to find here is someone to be that de-escalatory voice, is an off-ramp out of this crisis. The problem is that we have a president who's not willing to speak clear-eyed when it comes to Russia. We have an outgoing national security advisor. We don't have someone in the post of Secretary of State. So we don't have that calming voice, someone who can reach out to Moscow and play that broker and try and simmer the seas.
General McCaffrey, as you do look at this, and we're just watching what's happening on the outside, and you've called this president a threat to national security in the past. What do you see happening behind these, if you will, factory doors, and what is that potential off-ramp to stop the back and forth?
Well, look, the Russians are provocative. Poor Mr. Putin, who's running an impoverished second or third world country without much strategic military power, with only essentially oil, natural gas, and nuclear weapons that we care about. He's threatened his neighbors. He's essentially turned into a party dictatorship inside Russia. It's a problem for us. And, you know, the whole notion of the nuclear escalatory language coming out of the Russians doesn't make any sense. You know, we had 70,000 nukes on both sides in the 80s. Now we're down to around 14,000. These six new strategic weapons he's announced don't make any sense. Neither side can overcome or first strike the other side. So the question is, what's Mr. Putin doing? He's got a lot of economic sanctions on him. He's been politically isolated. He's going down the wrong path. And I think President Trump is starting to recognize that. And at least there was some joint response with our European allies over this signature assassination in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, part of the conversation here, too, Betsy, is, you know, when the EU was first formed, the joke was, who do you call in the EU, right? Because there were so many different countries represented. Now the EU, at least when I was at the Brussels Forum a couple of weeks ago, they were saying, who do we call in the United States for issues related to this very issue of national security? Who do they call? Is it General Mattis?
General Mattis is certainly one of the most influential national security voices in this administration, somebody who both takes the more traditional, if you will, Republican or national security space line on Russia, while also, crucially, holding the ear of the president and having the capability of influencing him. One of the major changes that we've seen over the first year and change of Trump's time in office is just the State Department essentially being put on the back burner, being totally marginalized. Foreign diplomats who work with the United States, who are having to figure out how to influence American policy, how to state their concerns, increasingly feel that the State Department is not a place that matters. It's not a place that matters in this administration. Now, one voice that's also quite important, of course, is Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador, and she's been pretty hawkish on Russia, along with many other figures in the Trump administration. She's particularly gone after Russia over their assistance and close relationship with the Iranian government. It's really interesting and key that there's such a dissonance between the president himself and all the people surrounding him on this key Russia issue. Also, of course, none of this makes sense unless you realize that the State Department has effectively been sidelined.
Ned, I want to stay on foreign affairs here, and Betsy, thank you for that, leading into this very next topic of Syria, an important topic, right, just based on at least the president's decision at the moment to hold off $200 million for U.S. forces there in that country. I want us to first listen to General Jonathan Braga, director of the military's operation against ISIS, and he was speaking with Richard Engel. Let's listen to that first.
That's horribly dangerous. It's we do not want to go back. We can't afford to go backwards on that. The world will pay a price. So I don't think we can go backwards. I don't even want to contemplate that future. That's not a world I want to live in.
And part of the complexity, as you know here, Ned, it's not only ISIS here that the general has to worry about. It is Turkish forces as of late, according to Richard Engel in his on-assignment reporting, as well as, of course, the concern of Russia.
That's right. It's becoming a regional conflagration. And I think the general is right in the sense that we are on the 2-yard line when it comes to the counter-ISIL fight. The successive administrations have made substantial gains since 2014 in pushing ISIL out of both Iraq and Syria. But all of those gains could be jeopardized if the Trump administration prematurely withdraws forces from Syria. It's also interesting to hear the president going down this road. Obviously, he has governed in a very different way than what he said on the campaign trail. By increasing the number of troops we have in Syria nearly tenfold in his first year and a half in office. Now he's talking about pulling back. So it's not clear whether this is red meat to his political base when he talks about withdrawing from Syria, or whether this is something he actually wants to do. But I think what is clear, what we're hearing from DOD, is that this is not something we can do prematurely. This is something we have to see through.
Yeah, talk about the campaign trail here, General McCaffrey, as you probably saw. The president on Thursday saying, we'll pull out of Syria. We'll let them take care of themselves, if you will. But yet there's $200 million that is much needed, according to General Braga on the ground. Proxy war, everything else happening there. How key is this $200 million?
Well, probably pretty important, and the continued presence of U.S. Special Operations Force. We've got a couple of thousand conventional and special operators inside Syria, 7,000 or 8,000 inside Iraq. A considerable number, 9,000 plus in Afghanistan. The naval and air power in the region is considerable. But we've got a lot of leverage. And there's been a big fight there in Syria. This was 65,000 plus ISIS fighters killed. The Kurds took 4,000 some odd killed. This is not the time at which to break ranks with the people on the ground. But there's no overstating the complexity of it. You need a scorecard to sort out the Turks, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the Kurds, the Syrian factions, Sunni and Shia. So it's not clear to me where we should go, but we should not abandon the fight until ISIS has been terminated. And by the way, ISIS is a concept as much as it is foreign fighters out of the UK or France.
20 seconds to you, Betsy. Last word here. What does the president want out of saying, hey, I'm not going to give the $200 million maybe?
It's perplexing, but that news came shortly after he had a phone call with Erdogan, who, of course, is in a complex situation vis-a-vis the Kurds. The likelihood that the president discussed that funding with Erdogan is, I would say, certainly plausible. That's something Erdogan would have liked to hear the president say. We also know the president has a soft spot for strongmen.
Yeah.
It appears that Erdogan is getting what he wanted from President Trump this week.
All right, Recep Erdogan, they're the leader of Turkey. Thank you so much. Betsy Woodruff, for your time. Can't thank you enough. General Barry McCaffrey, and of course, Ned Price right here in New York City with us. And this programming note for you, which we were alluding to during this very segment, Richard Engel on assignment. That's going to air